Welcome to EO Talks, Eastern Oregon's very own talk show, only here on EO Alive.
Hey, Eastern Oregon, thank you for joining us on EO Talks. And we're continuing our CHD series on medical assisted treatment program, which is a part of our local CHD. And I'm joined today by Jammie Rodighiero, who is the director of that program. Hey, thanks, Jammie, for being a part of us today.
Thanks, Brent. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to talk about our medication-assisted treatment program. As the coordinator, I really enjoy it, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, cool. Well, so start with telling us a little bit about you. Where are you from? How did you get here? And how did you get to be a part of this position?
Well, that's a long story that I'll try and shorten. I actually grew up in Eastern Oregon in a small town in Monument. So I'm from the area. My husband and I moved away to pursue a career outside of the area. We moved back. I'd always been thinking about getting my certification for alcohol and drug counseling. I was able to do that with Center for Human Development. So I've been there for a while, and I loved the idea of the medication-assisted treatment program. And when there was a position that opened up for the coordinator, I jumped at it because I'd kind of helped on the sidelines for a while. So,
well, good. So let's start there. So the medication assisted treatment program, the MAT program. So at the core of that is helping with addictions with the assistance of other medications. Is that am I encapsulating that correctly?
So what we're talking about with the medication-assisted treatment program, it is an all-encompassing, designed to be a holistic treatment. So we're talking about medications in combination with counseling.
Got it. Okay. And so thank you. And your primary focus has to do with opioid use, and which there's been a ton of buzz over the last several years about what opioids are, and there's just been a lot of buzz because the addiction to opioids has significantly increased over the last several years. And but for people, for people like me, who I don't have a family member that I know of that is struggling. And I guess that's the whole point of this conversation is that we don't always know. But for someone who, like me, I'm just uninformed, I haven't experienced that. Is that really a problem? And I asked Aaron this same question, last week also, or a couple of weeks ago. Is this something that really is an issue here in Union County, Grand Ronde Valley?
Yes, it really is. It's something that's not talked about often. It's something that's highly stigmatized. And part of that creates a barrier to seeking treatment. That's part of why I was so ecstatic to come on here and talk about it. We really want to shed a light and be able to have these conversations that may not be necessarily easy to have, and they may be difficult for people to have with individuals they care about that they're suspecting there may or may not be use. It's a difficult conversation to have, and we totally respect that. But we do want to bring it up so we can have those conversations and educate people and offer assistance.
And for those people that might not understand, and this program that we're doing, this arrangement with EO Alive TV and EO Talks and CHD and the MAT program, this is something that we're going to be doing ongoing for the next 6 months together. And so I think this is the second session of 12 that will be happening all together. And so then over a course of time, we're going to be digging in and exploring that. We'll have different experts and explaining the program in a much more detailed fashion. And it's important to understand that like you mentioned, it's kind of a full service program. There's a counseling element to it. There's a very medical side of it also. I don't know, maybe talk just briefly about the program and kind of its holistic approach.
Fantastic. I'd love to. So part of what the draw is to CHD is that we're a program where we have not only the psychiatric nurse practitioner who's working with you on your medications, we also have a nurse who's helping monitor that. We have a medical assistant who's also helping you to schedule. We have my position that's a MAT coordinator. So I look at the MAT coordinator, as a hub. So you're going to hear a lot from me. We're all big on communication as a team. You also have recovery mentors that they have that lived experience to help have those conversations that per se, maybe myself or someone else may not have a deeper understanding or the insight. They do. They have that insight, that lived experience. And you're also going to have case managers who are going to help wrap into resources, if you will. If there's something else you're struggling with that you need some assistance with, those case managers are going to help you.
And that sounds, as one of the things that Aaron mentioned last week was that there's hope in that holistic approach. So it's not just a simple patch that may or patch physically. A patch that may or may not work, but it's something to deal with the whole thing, because opioid use, for those people that are struggling with that, it affects their family members. It affects their job. But I would imagine that there are, you guys have resources. This is the thought out program. You're going to help people step through this process.
Yes, it is specific. We actually in the program have what's called a tier system. We explain specifically how that tier system works. It's 6 different tiers. Individuals start at the first tier, and that's where you get really that introduction as far as how the program outline looks. You're going to hear more about that if you are an individual who's seeking services, or even if you're outreaching on behalf of someone you know and you want to just have the information. You get to talk to me, and I am more than happy to talk to people about this and the options and the education.
Excellent. So Jammie, you sent me a video to kind of help us understand what opioids are and what they encompass. So let's take a look at that video real quick.
I use fentanyl patches for my cancer pain. It helps.
I used to think that heroin users were junkies, criminals. The first time I used it, I couldn't believe how amazing I felt.
My life revolves around getting my oxy.
When I need a fix, I feel so bad I would do anything to get more fentanyl, oxy, or heroin, even steel. These are the voices of opioid use in America. The total number of opioid-related deaths in this country was 5 times higher in 2016 than 1999. This epidemic is killing thousands of Americans each year, and the death toll keeps rising. What is important for you to know about opioids? Opioids are a class of medication used to treat many different types of pain. You could be prescribed an opioid, which might have the name of Oxycontin, Vicodin, Percocet, codeine, and you could be prescribed these things after surgery or an injury. Your doctor may suggest stronger versions, like fentanyl, if you have cancer pain. In the short term, these medications can be used safely and do their job without causing problems. It's when people start using them for longer periods of time, or at higher doses, that it might be time to start worrying about the risks of dependency and addiction. People say they feel wonderful when they first take it. After the euphoria, people say they're relaxed, mellow, drowsy. Some describe a rush of really pleasant feelings. All opioids, whether they are prescribed or an illegal substance, are very addictive. Feeling so good for a short period of time is an escape from suffering, and being relaxed and pain-free for several hours afterwards is even better. People don't want the feeling to end. Problem is, when the drug wears off, withdrawal starts. People feel agitated and anxious. They start sweating, trembling, feeling their muscles ache all over. Sounds like a bad case of the flu. People hate it, and it makes their pain feel worse. They take the drug again, and they feel better. And this is how the cycle of dependency and addiction starts. So if you or someone you love is using too much of an opioid, either prescription medication or an illegal drug, there is help. Treatment works, and people live in long-term recovery. There's even a way for family members to save someone who might have just overdosed by using a new medication called naloxone. Learn more about addiction risk, overdose, naloxone, and recovery in our other short courses.
So interesting that, I mean, the thing that struck me is that I'm not sure that I had ever, I mean, I've had Percocet before, I'd had Vicodin, but I didn't really ever put that in the same category as heroin because, you know, I don't take heroin. Heroin is something that's far away from me. And, but so that is, I mean, that's really interesting. So how, I mean, how do people, so it kind of sounds like people can have two different walks. I'm sure they have more to get into this bind. You know, maybe one, they're a recreational drug user and they get to that place where they're dependent on it. But this is really an interesting thing that people can find themselves in a jam taking the medications after surgery. I don't know, talk a little bit about that if you would, because that I mean, that applies to all of us.
So a big thing to remember that I like to point out to everybody is that people with addiction come from all walks of life. Addiction doesn't discriminate. I think there's a lot of negative stereotypes and stigmatisms that come out when we talk about drug use in a general sense. The important thing to really remember is, like you said, somebody could be having a surgery or having pain medication, and they have this thought to themselves that I could never be a drug addict. And I say that not in a condescending tone, and the reality that people don't think about it. It's one of those where you find yourself having a surgery, you take the pain medications as prescribed, and you don't think there's going to be an issue. However, as the video talked about, if you see yourself over time having more of the pain medication than prescribed, if you're self-diagnosing or self-medicating, or in the case where they talked about, you know, sitting there and saying, well, I want to feel good, I want to escape other feelings. Those are all red flags that you're going to want to really take a step back and look at. Or for individuals who are watching this for a loved one, those are signs you're going to want to pay attention to.
So then what is and you and I talked a little bit about this before we started the show, and that is, how do you distinguish the difference between a craving for a hot smell of coffee, or for, if you're addicted to cigarettes, you know, for the nicotine rush? How do you determine, how do we know the difference? If I'm experiencing those things myself, how do I know that I'm potentially finding myself in a point of trouble?
Such a great question. So what I like to talk about is the physiological response. So we're not just dealing with cravings, because I mean, there's a ton of people who talk about, I feel like in the morning, I smell that coffee, I want to have that coffee. There's a large difference between that and, for example, where you're spending the majority of your time thinking about something like opioids. So you're spending, you know, your afternoon doing something else, and all of a sudden you're like, I really want this, I'm going to have it. You would do anything to get a hold of that. And your body is also in that state where it has to have it. It's such a different thing in comparison to when you're talking about necessarily a craving, like, oh, I want nachos, or, oh, I have a craving for this. Versus when you're really in the weeds of it, the thick of it, and explaining addiction, you're talking about your body reaction. Like in that video, they talk about how if you don't have it, you physically go into withdrawals. Withdrawals, for example, like the flu symptoms, but extreme.
Interesting. And I remember as a teenager watching a drug user go through withdrawals, and, you know, and I remember watching her body contort and what she was going through. But I had never really thought of it as flu-like symptoms. And so again, that's something is like, wow, that's something I can relate to. That's something I can get my head around, you know? So that's really interesting to me, because, and I think that's the point of the program is that you guys are trying to reach, in some regards, this is kind of a quiet addiction sickness. I don't know what I mean, and I'm not probably saying the wrong words, but the point is this is untreated. And so then I guess the question would be, yeah, but we're not a big city. We don't, is this really a thing? Is this really a thing in Union County? Is this really a thing here?
It is. And growing up in a rural area, I can tell you it is very much a thing. It's just very highly stigmatized again. And a lot of concerns come forward about, if I go seek help, I'm going to have comments, and also the shame. There's a lot of individuals who they don't want to seek out the help because they have this shame, this feeling of I did something wrong, and that's not the case. So we really want, like I said, to make sure that we shine a light on this. We want to say, let's talk about it. Let's not have it be the monster in a corner where, you're afraid that there's a monster there, but you don't have a light to look at. Let's shine the light so we can look at it and have an idea of what it is.
And I can tell you from my own personal experience and some of the things that I've dealt with, what a relief it was to be able to talk about something openly that I was struggling with, and so because the shame that you feel, causes quietness. It causes me to deny that it's even an issue. It causes me to white knuckle just a little bit more, and so then at the point where I can finally flop it out there in front of me, in front of other people and with other people and have them still love me and accept me. That's a huge process for a lot of people. So you talked a little bit about the program itself and the holistic approach. What would people expect? What happens when they say, okay, I make the call, what happens after that? What's kind of the journey that they begin? And I know that part of this we're going to explore in detail over the next 10 weeks, but for those people out there that's like, okay, this is me, I really need to make that call. And let's say they call you next Monday or they send you an email next Monday. What can they expect? What happens?
So something I also like to say that's just fantastic is the communication aspect for this program. So you're going to outreach. You can contact CHD's regular line. You can contact what we have specifically, which is called the Hope line. And that's 541-562-HOPE. And if you call that, you're actually going to get me directly on that line. And you're going to get to talk to me, and we're going to talk about the program itself specifically. I always like to say it's easy as 1, 2, 3, because it really is. It's designed where you can get a hold of somebody, you can talk about what's going on. We want to know about you specifically as an individual and what you want help with. How do we help you? That's what it's about. And when you connect with me, I'm the hub of the program where I'm going to connect you to the medical assistant. I'm going to connect you to peers, the recovery mentors, the case manager. We're going to have a conversation about what you need and what you want. And we're going to work with you to do that. We're going to create a partnership and go through the process with that, along with assigning you a counselor to have those one-on-one sessions when there's particular information surrounding trauma, for example, where maybe you don't want to talk about that with me. And that's okay. We'll get you a counselor who you can talk to about that.
And talk to me for just a minute again about why, and we talked a little bit about, what was the word that you used? Harm reduction. Harm reduction. Talk a little bit about that so people understand why I shouldn't delay. Why do I need to deal with this now?
So harm reduction as a whole is a philosophy. It's where you're working with the individual to reduce the harm, basically. So in this program, we're working with the individual to meet them where they're at specifically. So if an individual, for example, needs to, work with a peer, they're going to work with a peer to get that assistance. If they need assistance with calling, for example, a SURE, because we do urine drug screens as part of the program. It's a tool used to help evaluate for the psychiatric nurse practitioner about your medication levels. So they're going to help you to get that if you need to have that access. That's what harm reduction is. It's really meeting that individual where they're at. It's working to really reduce the harms. For example, with opioid use disorder, there's a high likelihood of overdosing. And part of that reduction is using something called Suboxone, which is part of the treatment program. And I think I actually have a video that I'd love to play if we're able to do that.
All right, let's take a look at that real quick.
Heroin derives its effect from being converted in the brain to morphine, which then binds to and activates the opioid receptors in the brain. The receptors are specialized proteins located on the surfaces of cells. Opioids latch onto the receptors and trigger effects in the cells. There are 3 types of opioid receptors: mu, delta, and kappa. Opioids that are either used for treatment or misused produce their effects primarily from binding to mu receptors. Activating these receptors can produce analgesic pain-killing effects, euphoria, sedation, dependence, respiratory depression, and more. The euphoric effect and dependence in particular may lead to addiction. Heroin is a full opioid agonist, which means that it binds to and fully activates opioid receptors. Other examples of full opioid agonists include methadone, codeine, and morphine. People who take opioids regularly, whether for medical reasons or illicitly, can develop a dependency on it. If they abruptly stop, they may develop uncomfortable withdrawal symptoms. Withdrawal can increase a person's risk of restarting opioids and overdosing, which can be fatal. Treatment with Suboxone can reduce withdrawal symptoms and lower the risk of overdose. The buprenorphine in Suboxone is a partial opioid agonist. As an opioid, it still produces analgesia and euphoria, but as a partial agonist, these effects are felt to a lower extent than with full opioid agonists. Furthermore, the opioid effects of buprenorphine increase with each dose increase until they reach a ceiling at moderate doses where even if the dose is increased, the effects do not. This lowers the risk of buprenorphine being abused and of side effects, making it a vital substitute for heroin or other full opioid agonists to help individuals addicted to opioids as they begin their detoxification.
Wow, interesting. So and there's a lot of content in that video. So, but in layman's terms, kind of talk about how is this medication introduced to help people detoxify? That was the word that they used. Talk about, practically, how is it used? How does that work?
So I'm going to tread lightly on this because this is a better conversation for our psychiatric nurse practitioner who could break this down a lot more specific. However, in layman's terms, what you're looking at, like we kind of just talked about harm reduction, is it's a step in harm reduction where it's reducing those triggers and those urges as far as physiologically speaking. So you're talking about it's still giving you the peace of mind that, I'm not feeling sick, but however, it's blocking other pieces of that as well. So it's really working with the person's body and with their chemicals, if that makes sense. I'm trying not to dive too deep into that.
So on a practical sense, how, does Suboxone greatly enhance does it greatly improve the ability for someone to detoxify? Could they detoxify without it?
So, of course, they could try and detoxify without it. There are other options. However, with Suboxone, it has shown an increase in effectiveness for people getting off of opioids. It also is, like I said, harm reduction. So it's limiting that withdrawal piece, that it's also limiting a person's ability, if you will. I don't always love these terms, but to get high, it's limiting those. So what it's really doing, like I said, it's working physiologically with the body to prevent those things, or prevent, for example, withdrawal. I think the earlier video also spoke about withdrawal and about, doing anything to get rid of that feeling, because you're similar to the flu. I know myself personally, I've had the flu and I've had those exact thoughts that I would do almost anything to get these feelings to stop. The nausea, it's just all encompassing, where a person on Suboxone, for example, they're not going to experience nausea. They're not going to experience those flu-like symptoms. This is going to help with the harm reduction and help to keep them to where they're stable, if you will.
Okay. And that makes sense because there are, I mean, I guess we could talk about the potential harms, but there are lots of things that people do for addictions, for a high. I mean, and when they're in that place, I mean, there's a lot of damaging things that they can do to themselves, to their property, to other people's property, to their family. And so it sounds like this is a path that helps them reduce some of those harmful things that they could be a part of, but at the same time, find the counseling element side of it. All of those other encompassing programs are alongside. And so the Suboxone is just one of the elements that kind of round out the entire program. Am I saying that right?
You are. So as I said, it's a holistic program. So you're not just receiving the medication, you're also receiving counseling services. So what we're very careful with, but what we do talk about is a lot of times addiction goes hand in hand with trauma, something that's happened to an individual that they're maybe trying to numb or they're trying to cover up in some addictions. So what counseling does is counseling helps to sort through those things while you're also receiving that medication. So it works together. And then you have case managers, like I said, who are going to help you get resources. So for example, if someone's struggling with opioid use disorder and they're struggling with housing, which is not uncommon, then we're going to have a case manager who's going to work with you on that, or even a peer mentor who you can call and talk to and say, I don't think anybody else understands me. You can have that conversation and not be concerned that that individual is going to judge you. They're there to help you. They care. That's part of the benefit of this program, is really making sure that people know there are individuals that want to help, that do care.
Excellent. Well, Jammie, this sounds like this could be life-saving, literally, to some folks out there who they're quietly suffering. They're dealing with the fear and the shame that they are experiencing. So this is awesome, and I'm excited over the next 10 sessions after this one for us to explore this more. So again, before we take off, tell the folks one more time how they can, who they need to call, or give them the information again to reach out.
So you have multiple ways you can reach out. You can call CHD's regular line. However, getting a direct line is always important. So you can call 541-562-HOPE, and you're going to get a direct person, and you're going to get a cell phone, and you're going to get to talk to me.
Excellent. All righty. Well, thank you, Jammie. And it was really nice to meet you. Anything else before we take off?
I just want to say thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. And I look forward to our rest of our series for our education to be able to talk about it and have those conversations that are tough. Let's talk about it.
Excellent. All righty. Thank you, Eastern Oregon. And if you have any questions, I would suggest that you put them in the comment section of the video here. CHD regularly monitors those comments, and in the session that we're going to have coming up, we can deal with some of the questions that you might have. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time right here on EO Live.